So welcome, Diana. Welcome, Malcolm. Part two of our TechCast with Secure Dynamics on integrity. So we talked about the CISO and his or her team and the culture behind it. From a vendor perspective, right? And again, we've all been there, but really it comes down to, for instance, I still have this memory from many years ago where we had an issue, right? We had an issue at GA. It was a day before GA was going to happen, and there was a big issue that was discovered. So the question was, so we have big deals in the pipeline, existing customers, and the customer support team, which was really obviously very close to the customer, they want to let their tier one customers know the reason for the delay. There was earnings report coming up. So from a financial standpoint, hey, let's not say anything right now. And then the product team, which I was part of, was right kind of caught in the middle of saying, okay, so we're delaying the GA, we're not going to announce anything, and yet these large customers are waiting for that particular release to come out, right? So in some sense, going back to what we talked about in the previous episode, which is there a cultural, is there a model compass, is there something that you can hang on to saying, hey, our job is to ensure that these things, under these circumstances, information should go out, under these circumstances should not? Or is it just fly by the seat of the pants and make sure that the boss is happy and at the expense of the customer? So Diana, let's start with you.
Yeah, so, I've only actually been involved in one case way back early in my career that was about a product ship or not. Mm-hmm. And the decision at the company was to ship bricks, basically. And then customer support was more, I know, it's awful. But most of what I get involved in the last couple of decades has been really around, there's been some sort of a breach, there's a problem or a vulnerability in the software or in the environment. How do we have this communication? And they're invariably that somebody at any company says, well, let's just not tell people. Let's keep it a secret, or let's delay it. But every company I've worked at where this has come up, after a lot of very difficult discussions and knowing that you don't want to go out and take your licks in public, it has always come down to full disclosure and say it as soon as possible. So you have to get you understand what the vulnerabilities are. There's also, you may need to disclose to some of your partners a little bit early, because it could impact depending on the ecosystem, could impact their products and their offerings. But yeah, as soon as you can, get it, be expedient and get the honest truth out there.
So Malcolm, does somebody have to go through the school of hard knocks to realize that what Diana said is the right way to go? A first timer, let's say, people who haven't been through this first time. So let's not say anything. So what's your experience been in terms of how do you discover the right thing to do?
Well, I think, again, there's context that you have to think about, right? So if you're a publicly traded company and there's a delay in an issue, whether it be a vulnerability or a product issue or whatever, a QA issue, and it's a non-material product or service, you don't have to disclose. But if it has a material implication on the company's finances, Sarbanes-Oxley, I'm sorry, you have to disclose. So again, there's context depending upon, so there's that side of it that would be driven by the SEC attorneys and all that stuff. And whether it's a vulnerability or a different QA issue, right? That would have its own path. Mm-hmm. Then there's the aspect of, if nobody sees it, can we cover it up? I mean, the reality is we all sweep stuff under the rug at times, right? And I've done it. We've all done it. I mean, we did it as kids. We do it at home. We do it at work. The question becomes, is it material? And does it get back to the intent? Are you trying to hide something? Or, sometimes, when you share things, it actually magnifies the issue. And so sometimes it's how you manage the message, right? And then in reality, the question becomes, if it's a nit, why would you say it? If it's material, you've got to figure out when and how to do it. And then this brings me to another thing, though. So to take it out of the context of one thing, and let's talk about data breaches, right? We see them on the news all the time.
Yeah.
How many organizations have lost intellectual property or had a ransomware event that wasn't visible, that they never mentioned,
Yeah.
and they're publicly traded? I would bet you a ton of them. Why? Because somebody looked at it through a legal lens and said, well, yeah, we did this. It affected these systems. It shut down this factory, but we made up the stuff, and we're not going to miss our revenue, so it's not financially material, so we're not going to report it. Or there's no intellectual property law loss data breach laws. It's all personal information. So you lose intellectual property all day long, and somebody will rationalize that it wasn't financially material, so therefore they don't have to disclose it. So, again, we have to look at it from that angle too, which means we are all to blame, perhaps sometimes, for not having the transparency we should.
So sticking with that, and this is something that I've talked about it all the time, even though I've never met Matthew Prince of Cloudflare. In fact, I was on his website again today. He actually has a blog where he talks about all the outages that happened because of Cloudflare. And I look, and again, there's a lot of technicality behind it. So he and his CTO actually put the stuff behind it, but it's a wrong thing. Hey, this is where things went wrong. This is how we screwed up. He's actually posted this on LinkedIn. I think this was the last breach that happened, the outage that happened in July. And literally, he quotes the CTO's blog and puts it on LinkedIn saying, this is how we screwed up. So I'm looking at it from a culture standpoint, right? Again, if I ever wanted to go to a vendor, that's an opt-in for me, because that's the sort of culture I want to be associated with, whether it's a top-down transparency. But you don't see that very often, do you, in terms of the CEO down, just putting everything out there in terms of what works and what doesn't work. And they obviously are in front of so many big web properties. So it's not like a small niche thing by saying, hey, we can do it because you don't have the risk service area, but they do. So again, Malcolm, I mean, how does somebody build a culture like that? And is that even feasible in this?
Well, it's a tone from the top issue, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a role modeling issue. No different than, again, let's take internal InfoSec. When I would go to the board, I would say, hey, here's the notable events we had last quarter. Mm. Even if we manage them well. Yeah. Again, right? Same thing. Employees, here's how many lost and stolen laptops we had. Here's how many this we had. I mean, when I was back at Intel, we had an information security section in the social responsibility material that went out that had, here's our goals, here's what we did, here's what we achieved, here's what we didn't achieve. So I think it's a tone from the top issue. And, you can be over transparent and create problems, which is why you have to put it in the context of how people are going to read into it. But I think people can thread the needle with an appropriate level of transparency that doesn't generate liability, that generates a level of trust, and holds everybody, including yourself, accountable for, sometimes the mistakes that get made.
So last question for you, Diana, which is, every organization is a digital organization, right? Collecting data, making predictions, sometimes not even knowing that they're collecting data because it's outsourced to a third party, didn't even know this existed. Like, what's an S3 bucket? So the fact that there are large companies, I mean, Malcolm, you mentioned Intel, we talked about Cloudflare, Diana, you came from Microsoft. I mean, these sorts of companies have the depth, they have the talent, they have the intent to do the right thing, and they have the ability to do it. What about all the other digital newbies, if you will, right? Who don't even know ABC of what is being collected, where it's being stored, what does encryption mean? And yet they have large customers like you and me who could get impacted by a data breach. So again, how does that reconciliation of, hey, coming up to speed really, really quickly, putting that integrity thread, if you will, and we make sure that they're ready? I mean, is that even feasible? Are we going to have more data breaches that are happening across hospitals and school districts that are going to continue to happen?
Well, I think you just touched on a really important point, is that some of these newer, smaller startups, as they're focusing on the functionality and getting these really great, amazing tools out there, they may not, if they're not coming from security, they don't have Malcolm Harkins, like they may not be thinking, building security in and designing for privacy. But then their buyers should really be the ones that help them understand that this is valuable to them. When I was at IBM, there was a project I was working on, and I was really excited by this startup piece of software. And I just asked them if I could get them on the phone before we used it for this project. And I started asking them questions about security, and it was an amazing tool, and they were amazing people. But at the end of this half-hour phone call, they said, you know what, we don't want to be in the running to be selected by you based on the questions. We don't think we're ready. And so I think that's where the onus then becomes on the companies that are doing the buying, just to ask some baseline questions. And you don't have to go in too much detail. And if it's a cloud provider, for example, you can go use the cake at the Cloud Security Alliance to get you a really good starting point. But I think that, yeah, you're right. Some of the smaller companies, they're not security experts. They're focusing on functionality. So it's really then the buyers that need to ask the hard security questions.
Got it. Great. Any final thoughts? I know we've done a 2-part episode on integrity. I know it's not talked about too much in the context of the human being behind it. Any final comments, things that you want to kind of leave the listeners and the viewers with?
Don't just listen to what people say, watch what they do.
Hey,
that's succinct, knowing Malcolm and Diana.
Yes, no, I think that's it. It's a look at people's actions and not just what they're saying and not what they're. If someone's telling you I'm the most honest person you've ever met, they probably aren't.
Yeah, no, that's great. So again, thanks for your time, Malcolm, Diana, and stay safe.
Thanks.
Thank you.